may need for, you know, your science class. All right. So, so far with the New Deal, or actually let's put it this way. In the Great Depression last time we heard about Hoover and how he initially does not do much but then finally starts to do more, but is ultimately, how did you guys vote as far as his level of success? Was it Holly Smoot or Mass Smoot? Okay. All right. Then in came FDR, and FDR is going to make these bigger, more radical changes right off the bat. He then continues with these. He then continues with all of these different types of programs like you just did with this alphabet soup, a lot of things. And he's got these focuses on, okay, providing relief, trying to provide recovery, and eventually doing some reforms. However, after about 3-ish years in office, still not gone. So you've gone through all of the almost the entire term of Herbert Hoover, and the Depression is still there. And now we've gone through most of a term of FDR, and it's still not gone. So, in other words, even though FDR might have been more effective at communicating, he was much more effective at making you feel a little bit better, not suffer quite as much. He even manages to reduce unemployment somewhat. He had taken it from about 25% down to about 15%. But 15% is still god awful. And so, as this unemployment crisis is still continuing, guess who's all of a sudden, guess what's going to all of a sudden start happening, obviously? Criticism. And the criticism is going to come from several different directions. And what I want to focus on today is A, what was the criticism? And B, what was the response of FDR to that criticism? Does he change what he is doing? Ultimately, and what I would like you to be prepared to do next time is we would have to judge FDR and his attempt at fixing the Depression. And in a way, it's World War II that actually truly ends the Great Depression. It's not necessarily the New Deal. And so with that little piece of information and the other stuff that I'm talking about today, I want you to kind of make your judgment, your evaluation on FDR and how he handles this immense crisis of the 1930s. Does that make sense? So in other words, when we begin next time, entrance ticket, this evaluation, and then B, we have a terms quiz that is the bold-faced stuff in chapter 23. Got it? So, the first two critics you should find familiar. Okay? The first two critics I basically call the I got crushed by Roosevelt on his way to the White House Club. Okay? The first was Al Smith from FDR's own party. You see, Al Smith tried to run for the Democratic nomination in 1932 after having been crushed by Herbert Hoover in 1928. But he loses to FDR. Now, Al Smith took this particularly bad because Al Smith had been FDR's mentor. Al Smith had been governor of the state of New York before FDR had, and had basically kind of brought him on and had almost kind of paved the job out for him. And then all of a sudden FDR comes along and crushes him as far as his second shot at the White House. Al Smith was more of a conservative Democrat. He was more of, he believed more in what you would call classic liberalism, where you don't like government to be very big. He is going to form what was known as the Liberty League. And what he tries to do is he tries to say that FDR and his programs are leading the United States toward becoming a socialist nation. So basically the Liberty League is the more conservative wing of the Democratic Party, saying that the party has gotten too radical and is borderline, gasp, socialist. Okay, does that make sense? The second critic that you should recognize is former President Herbert Hoover. The big thing that Herbert Hoover is worried about, these programs, they cost some money. And the government isn't bringing enough in on taxes and enough in on tariffs to cover these expenditures. And so basically what you are doing, if you are spending more than you are bringing in, it's known as deficit spending. And what it does is that you have a debt called the national debt. And every year you run a deficit, you add, you accumulate in that national debt. Okay? And so Herbert Hoover is saying, you got to stop this, because what's going to happen is you are going to settle the future, okay, with this debt. And in effect what you're doing is you are robbing the future of their liberty. You are robbing the future of their freedom to pay for, in effect, your sins. He called it a holy crusade for liberty. The second thing that Hoover said, which I mainly throw in here almost for amusement value, is what he did is he took the New Deal and he said, you know who would have done this? William Jennings Bryan. Yes, this is Bryanism, people! No! Bryanism is back! Don't we hate Bryanism in the past? Stop the Bryanism! So even in death, okay, William Jennings Bryan is coming back to haunt us, okay? Because Herbert Hoover is saying, it's Bryanism, and that's what it So can everyone see this? This would be a political attack on the conservative wing of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The second group to attack FDR were business. Most notably, the National Association of Manufacturers. These were business leaders who believed that all of those regulations, all of those laws, all of those things where the government's coming in and going, okay, is hurting our ability to prosper. And what they believed is in unfettered capitalism. That's such a funky way of saying it. When I say something like unfettered capitalism, what is that fancy? That's fancy speak for what? What is unfettered capitalism? Unregulated. So basically, don't put limits on the business. We need the business to grow to get us out of this depression. And if you chain us up, you're going to slow us down. And we'll never, ever get out of this depression. This organization is going to be very influential on future politicians. Okay, so there's two names. These are going to be names that are coming from a future unit. Okay, so you know how we have these stimulus things where you have to sometimes compare time periods? Okay, so this is coming from a future time period. These future politicians that are very much influenced by the National Association of Manufacturers, a guy by the name of Barry Goldwater, and a guy by the name of Ronald Wilson Reagan. Okay, so in effect, these attitudes will have an effect on future, and I will tell you this, Republican politicians, such as Barry Goldwater and Ronald Wilson Reagan. A third entity that is going to be, I guess, maybe it's a stretch to say critical, is going to be the Supreme Court. You see, the Supreme Court is going to rule on one of the programs that FDR beloved, one of the programs that he thought was key to the recovery of the United States from the Great Depression. Okay? The National Recovery Act, or the National Industrial Recovery Act, is going to be declared unconstitutional. Their argument was that FDR had started to violate the Constitution with this law because its regulations had started to regulate businesses that were entirely within a state. Now remember, all the regulations that we've been talking about before had been interstate. Okay, remember the Interstate Commerce Act, when things go over state lines. Well, in this case, it was actually a chicken farm that was that brought this suit. It was located entirely within a state, and it sold its product entirely within a state or intrastate. And therefore, they felt that they should not have to abide by the National Industrial Recovery Act. The Supreme Court agreed. They struck down the NRA, okay? And then they went on a little spree. They started striking down other New Deal programs, such as the AAA, or the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And so So basically, if you're, so FDR, what do you think his opinion of the Supreme Court is at this point? Is what? Who? Okay, they're taking my program. Okay, does this make sense so far? So far, who are the groups that are critical? You've got more conservative politicians like Al Smith and Herbert Hoover. You've got business groups, and now you have the court. Okay? The next critic actually comes from, or at least will end up from, the far right. His name was Father Charles Coughlin. They nicknamed him the Microphone Messiah. What he did is he had a radio program in which he would talk about his views on, he would be fairly comparable to maybe a Rush Limbaugh today. Okay? He formed an organization known as the National Union for Social Justice. And he believed that what needed to happen is that the banks needed to come fully under the direction of the government. That's the only way you could fully fix the American economy. But while we say this guy is from the far right, he falls under a spell. He starts to see how another country in Europe was recovering faster than the United States. And so therefore, we should do whatever that other country in Europe is doing. And so, his program became increasingly anti-Semitic and increasingly fascist. In case you're not getting this, Hitler is doing it so much better than us. We should do it Hitler's way. Is pretty much what you were hearing on the radio. All right, so that's Father Charles Coughlin. Other attacks are going to come a little bit more from what you might call today the left. Okay. A notable one comes from a guy by the name of Dr. Francis Townsend. And basically what he said is one of the things where FDR's fallen down on the job is dealing with older Americans. That we still have a system here in the United States where somebody can work their whole life for a wage, and then when they can no longer work, when they can no longer provide for themselves, they have, well, nothing. There was nothing in society for these people. And so what Dr. Francis Townsend says is that these people, Americans, should receive from the government a pension. It was $200 a month back then. It's very similar to something that we will have now. Social Security. Now, I've just given you a hint as to how FDR is going to respond to some of these critics. If this critic says you're not doing enough for older Americans, okay, and you need to have a pension for older Americans, and I'm saying this is the inspiration for Social Security, so what do you think FDR is going to do with some of these attacks? Use them. Does that make sense? It's sometimes the best weapon you can use. You're attacking me, and I say, okay, well fine, I take your idea. Whoops, can you attack me anymore? Does that make sense? From the further left, you have a guy from down in Louisiana way. His name is Huey Long. If you've ever flown into Nolens, you have probably driven down the Huey Long Expressway. Okay? They love Huey Long down in Louisiana. Huey Long basically was capitalizing on the popular discontent. You're unhappy? Well, why are you? Somebody should ought to do something. I shall do something. You need to. I shall do it. Okay. And basically is, you know, what do you need? Hey, I will do that. You just vote for me. I shall take care of everything. You know what? You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna make every man a king. You know, every person in America. You know what they deserve? They deserve a radio and an automobile. That's right. Everybody in America should have these things. It's only fair. We ought to. You know what we ought to do here in America? We ought to share the wealth. Is it fair that some people have all the money and the rest of us don't? Well, we need to do something. There needs to be more equity. Now, his way of enforcing this equity is, you know, fairly Robin Hoodish, okay? He basically proposed a 100% tax on every dollar you earn over $1 million. So, you know, after you're up to $1 million, you're okay. But after $1 million, everything you earn, government gets. Okay? All right? Because do you need more than $1 million? Are you kidding me? $1 million, you're fine. You're doing okay. So after $1 million, it's all what? It's, you know, for showing off. So over $1 million goes to the government. Now let's say your daddy rich, okay, and he's going to give you all the money. Well, you can only have an inheritance of $5 million. Every dollar over $5 million goes to the government. Because we don't want to encourage any sort of aristocracy developing here in the United States. I mean, them Rockefeller children, do they need all the money? No, they don't. They didn't earn it. The government ought to have it so we can share. So that you can have yourself a radio and you can have yourself a car. Every man a king. That's kind of scary, isn't it? Imagine you have all these people who I got nothing. And you got this guy saying, hey, don't you worry about having nothing. I'll take care of you. Do you think that buys him some followers? Oh yeah, it did. Anyway, FDR feared that Francis Townsend, Coughlin, and Long would form a third party and face him in the election of 1936. They were already rumbling at doing this. And yes, these three groups didn't necessarily agree with one another, but they felt that they were more powerful as a group than separately. And so Roosevelt's a little worried. He thinks he might have a little bit of a fight on his hands, particularly from the left, in 1936. But somebody assassinates Huey Long in 1935. Yeah, don't go with Roosevelt. Huey Long hurt a lot of people in Louisiana. Basically, the way it ran in Louisiana is if you subscribed to his ideas, if you just followed him blindly, bravo. If you questioned him, he crushed you. He crushed you politically. He made sure you got nothing. And he had crushed a lot of people along the way. And we believed it was a rival faction in Louisiana that took him out. All right. So pause here for a moment. Everybody kind of have an idea of some of the critiques of the New Deal. One, I kind of gave it to you out front a little bit. A lot of change, a lot of programs, but had it gotten rid of the Depression, the answer was no. And because it hadn't gotten rid of the Depression, you had a lot of people saying that it's going about it all wrong. Roosevelt's reaction to this, these critiques, is basically going to lead to a shifting of American politics. And people have asked me in this class, particularly last semester and the beginning of this semester, when do things start looking a little bit more like how we see them now? This is when things start looking a little bit more how we see them now. The parties, as we kind of know them today, they're not quite there yet, but you're going to see them emerging here. Does that make sense? Anyway, it is at this point which the American version of the welfare state comes into being. FDR reacted to his critics, particularly Long and Townsend, by basically shifting his politics to the left. Now, is that a term? Is that one that when I say it, you get? In modern day politics, if you are conservative, you are considered to be on the right. If you are liberal, you are considered to be on the left. In today's politics, it's pretty much a kind of a little bit more conservative than what will emerge out of the New Deal era, okay, overall. But it's basically left, liberal, right, conservative, or at least by today's standards. So FDR is basically looking at people who are saying, just give everybody the money for free. Have these social safety net programs. And he feels that he's got to adopt some of these ideas, or he could be knocked out of office from the left. So what he does is he counters Townsend's ideas, Coughlin's ideas, and Long's ideas by adopting parts of the programs. If you examine some of the things that will happen in laws from this point forward, you can find little aspects, banking from Coughlin. You can find Social Security with, is Townsend. And any program which was basically going after wealth, okay, something that was reminiscent from Long. We call this shift the second New Deal. So if I were quickly to say, okay, what was then the first New Deal really about? What do you think the first New Deal was really about? What would you say the main focus of the first New Deal? What would you say the main idea is? Jobs. Trying to get us jobs. Trying to do something about the unemployment. Okay? Here, it's about creation of a social safety net. It also starts to reach into the idea of social justice. Now, some people quibble with that because there are some things that FDR did that aren't very social justice-like, okay, particularly that happened in World War II. But social justice that we're talking about here is for the poor, for the elderly, and for labor would be the main groups that he was focusing on. Was it all groups? No. But was it some groups that were ignored in the past? Yes. He helps create the welfare state. The example of helping create the welfare state is Social Security. The example of trying to do social justice is the Wagner Act. You had it on your card as the National Labor Relations Act. What that did is when they overturned the NRA, they got rid of the idea of outlawing the yellow dog contract. The Wagner Act brings that back, that you have the right to collective bargaining. All right. I think it's a good time for you to kind of try and put it together for yourself. summarize some of these critiques of the New Deal, and then briefly try and describe how FDR tries to respond to them. Finish up whatever sentence you're writing. And then club to heart in your group. Okay. Discuss your answer. And diamond to spade in your group. Discuss your answer. Okay. You guys can just pivot with the three of you.
Whatever they were talking about. Yeah. Well, I said he didn't provide yeah, because everyone just like was thinking different ideas about it. And tease, I guess, what you said. Because they thought that like it was
Is there a way to just sum up, the critiques? Is there a way to say it quickly? Juliet.
So I said there were kind of like three different groups or sections of critiques. So I said he got political critiques from Republicans and then conservatives, like Smith and Hoover. There were critiques from business leaders who just wanted unregulated capitalism. And then lastly, the Supreme Court ruled some of the acts like from the New Deal as unconstitutional.
Anything else on critiques that you kind of want to think of the output as far as part of the discussion? Nothing about, yeah, thank you.
His program helped like older people.
Yeah, specific groups that felt that what was happening did not include them. Okay. And then, just to make sure you kind of get this here, and it's kind of even a lesson in politics, is what did Roosevelt do about it? So people are hitting him, what does he do back? Yeah. And in this sense, he actually reminds me of Thomas Jefferson. What Thomas Jefferson had done was he basically just started to adopt most of the things that the Federalists had, making the Federalists obsolete. And so here you've got somebody who's saying, oh, you're not doing something for older Americans. Whoop, now I am. Go away. Okay? It basically makes your critics, in some ways, disappear. This brings us to a term that is basically going to bring us closer to some of the political definitions we currently have. It's a new form of liberalism that will emerge during the New Deal era, though, if you look carefully, it wasn't born here. It probably was born more with the beginning of the Progressive era. It's just kind of fully delivered by this point. Yes?
To go back on the Thomas Jefferson thing, would that be an example of synthesis?
Yes.
How long did you have to talk about that?
Just to get, as long as you gave an example of something that Thomas Jefferson did that was similar, you'd be good. So you make a claim, and then you give a fact to back up your claim, and you're good.
So synthesis is basically just your repeats itself?
It can be. It can. That is a form of synthesis if you say something like that. Saying that there's a similarity to that type of. So here's a change. Okay, so continuity and change over time. A change. When we used to talk about liberalism, and we now call it classic liberalism, what the idea of what liberalism was is that the individual gained his freedom, his liberty, by having free markets and weak government. Think about this. This is a reaction to, like, Great Britain. Great Britain had ruled as a king over, like, the colonies. So getting rid of him and having a weaker form of government was a step toward liberalism. Secondly, the Empire of Great Britain used an economic system, mercantilism, which didn't allow businesses and markets to grow to their greatest extent that they possibly could. It was about enriching the empire. So freedom from that would be another step toward liberalism. So once again, classic liberalism. Matt?
Why are colleges like liberal?
Instead of having only, it's not necessarily liberal college as much as liberal arts, is that having more freedom of ideas as opposed to sticking to just a few, like science or something like that. Does that make sense? New Deal liberals basically take this old form of liberalism and modify it. And again, it didn't start here. The progressives you could probably credit for starting this process. But basically what neoliberalism, in order to preserve individual liberty, government has to be strong. Government needs to be there to help the needy. Government needs to be there to guarantee your basic welfare. So in other words, old school liberalism was weak government because we didn't want big king government getting too much into our lives. Now, this modern version of liberalism is, yes, we need government in our lives to help us. To help us with our general welfare, our commonwealth. And so if you want to bring this idea to its conclusion, in effect, those in favor of laissez-faire capitalism, which may have been classic liberals before, now become known as conservatives. You see what I just did? Okay? I took a word that you were confused with, I think, early on in this year, because it wasn't jibing with the way your brain was going, wait! And now we found it again. Okay? Laissez-faire capitalists are now known as conservatives. Okay, so that was, oh my goodness. I just flipped everything over. Can everybody handle this? Can everybody handle the flip? I'm hoping you can, because hopefully it puts it into where your brain had it to begin with, and I was messing with it before. Okay? Now the words are fitting more what you think. Okay? What has still not quite caught up, by the way, are the political parties. The political parties at this point are not ideologically pure. Both parties had both a conservative and a liberal wing. That changes mainly in the 1960s. Got it? In 1936, we see the kind of the test of the emergence of these new ideas to see how the American public was kind of feeling about it. And what the response of the and the way that FDR plays it is kind of perfectly. Here we are, still in the middle of a depression, and it's basically making you choose. Which side are you on? Are you in favor of helping those in need, or are you with the greedy people? Need versus greed. Do you want to just take the money away from everybody, or do you want to help people? What do you want to do? Or who are you? The Republicans are going to run a guy by the name of Alf Landon, who condemns the radicalism, the experimentation, the confusion of the New Deal. And guess what? He's actually very much spot on. There were very much radical aspects of the New Deal. There were confusing things in the New Deal. There was a lot of experimentation. The problem is he's saying it like it's a bad thing. He also was handicapped by the fact that he had a very poor radio voice, and he was a poor public speaker. So here he is trying to make a speech on the radio, and he doesn't sound very good on the radio. And he's up against the guy who sounds like, oh, FDR, he cares. Oh. The election goes, well, you can see how it went. Ouch. one of the biggest landslides in American history. One of the biggest, yes.
What's the biggest?
Well, electoral vote was obviously Washington or Monroe, but Reagan is very similar to this, one state, as is Nixon. He's one state as well. So this is 2 states. It was always 2 states, but it's fewer electoral votes. Okay, so remember, so now we're going back to the philosophical thing we were talking about a moment ago. And that gave you kind of an idea of who Al Smith was as far as his beliefs. And so his reaction to the election, you got to say it kind of tongue-in-cheek in your mouth, right? You go, well, no one shoots Santa Claus. Okay, so everybody, can you kind of hear it in your brain that way? What's he saying? He's basically saying that this is the reason why FDR wins. But what's he trying to say about FDR? Yeah, he's giving it all up. That's why he won. So do you get the critique? So if you write that quote down, make sure you understand it. So if you go back and look at it, you don't just go, what's about 10? I don't understand. Okay, make sure you kind of put it into perspective what this quote means. Not only does FDR win, but the Democrats win a 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress. This had been the 3rd straight election in which the Democrats trounced the Republicans. So basically the Democratic Party's having kind of its Sally Field moment. It's saying, you like me, you really like me. They really believe that they are the party that has the right idea for America. The Democrats have also created a winning coalition. Coalition means different groups who come together to basically vote in favor of kind of one party in the United States. The coalition was a little weird. For one, it includes the South. Remember I said that the party was not ideologically pure. So guess what the South represents in the Democratic Party? The what party? The Conservative Party. Awkwardly, also in the coalition were Northern African Americans. Okay? People in the city, immigrants, particularly Catholic and Jewish immigrants, labor unions, and the poor. This coalition's powerful. It hadn't quite formed yet, but we credit it with electing FDR in 1932. It elects FDR in 1936. It elects FDR in 1940. It elects FDR again in 1944. It will elect Harry Truman in 1948. It takes some time off. And then elects John F. Kennedy in 1960 and Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964. The New Deal coalition wins 7 of 9. Okay? Very powerful group. Yeah?
Well, wasn't originally like the 1860s stuff the Republicans were
remember the original Democratic Party under Martin Van Buren, where you had the common man Democrats and the South? They're back. It's actually close to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They already test the persistence of our progressive purpose. So let us ask again, have we reached the goal of our vision of that 4th day of March, 1933? Have we found our happy valley?
The building of this winning coalition causes FDR to make his first and perhaps his biggest error. Big mistake, big blunder. You see, he believed that given that he had won in 32, the Democrats had won in 34, and then he had won in 36, meant that the people wanted his policies. Yet what did that stinky Supreme Court do? What did that stinky court do? Struck down his beloved NRA. Struck down his beloved Agricultural Adjustment Act. Striking down programs that he thought were crucial to his fixing the American economy. Well, that's wrong. If the people want these things, the court shouldn't be able to block them. Sit. What FDR does is he asks Congress to change up the makeup of the United States Supreme Court. He asked Congress to write a bill that would allow him to appoint an additional justice for every justice over the age of 70. In other words, guess all those Republican old justices, right? He wants to basically cancel them out. Think about it this way: if you are on FDR and you are losing case after case on 6-3, okay, and you are able to appoint an additional justice for every justice over 70, and there just happen to be 6 of them, well, now guess what the score just became? So what's wrong with it? Why is this such a mistake? What's the big deal? Why is this a mistake? What does it look like? It kind of looks like Andy Jackson. What?
It looks like he's trying to take all the power.
He's trying to take all the power himself. And isn't there somebody like over in some other country doing similar things that we don't like? Yeah. It was starting to look a little like that. The interesting thing is that even though Congress says no, the court, and there is not a really good reason for this, stopped striking down his laws. After he did this, all of a sudden the court starts being a little bit warmer toward his policies. And then, you know what those old justices had the kindness to do? They had the kindness to do the same thing that Justice Scalia did last weekend. Okay? And eventually, what FDR will be able to do is appoint 9 justices to the United States Supreme Court. Some of them were the same seat over again. He appoints the second most of all presidents. Okay? Y'all know who the first most is, right? Because I already gave the answer by saying first. Yeah.
Aren't there only 9?
Yeah. So a couple of them, you appointed someone and then they died. It happens when you're president for over 12 years, right? Okay. So the last thing that I kind of want to talk about today is an economic philosophy that emerges from the New Deal era known as Keynesian economics. The problem that Roosevelt faced in his second term was that he didn't end the Depression yet. Now, I did do a big thing. The unemployment rate was 25%. Oh my God, ghastly, horrible, ugh, 25%. Well, he got it down to, oh my God, ghastly, 15%. Did he fix it? No. But going into the election of 1936, he listened to the criticism of Al Smith and Herbert Hoover. And Al Smith and Herbert Hoover said he was spending too much money. So right as the election ends, FDR will take his foot off the accelerator and he'll stop spending so much on social programs. The result was a sharp economic downturn. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, in the middle of the Great Depression, we had a recession. You can do that, okay? Everybody imagine, so everybody just follow my hand. So I'm going down like this, okay, that's an economic downturn. We are still, what FDR does is he starts to bring us up. We're starting to recover. We haven't reached where we were, okay, but we're starting to recover. Well, in 1937, we start to go down again. So in other words, a recession in the Depression. Roosevelt's answer was to embrace the ideas of Lord Maynard Keynes, Keynesian economics. And basically what Lord Maynard Keynes says is, during a depression, during a recession, spend the money. You got to spend the money to replace the money that was lost by all of these companies not producing. It's the government's job to fill in that hole. In doing so, what should you spend that money on? Infrastructure. Because it's actually cheaper to build during Depression. And so what you do is you build dams, you build roads, you build stuff. Okay? And even though you're spending the money, on the back end, guess what? You have stuff. And you built it probably cheaper. So what you did is A, you replaced the money in the economy to help get better. And B, you've got stuff. Keynesian economics. Purposely run a deficit. The critique of Keynesian economics, however, is when you do deficit spending, you accumulate something known as debt. When FDR entered the presidency, the United States government was in debt, okay, by about $19 billion, okay? By 1939, what we call the end of the Great Depression, which does not truly end by anything that FDR does, but by World War II. Our debt is now $40 billion. Barack Obama would love to have a debt of $40 billion. He would fall to his knees and rejoice if he had a debt of $40 billion. But this used to be a lot of money. Okay? It used to. We now use the T word. Okay? Okay? Trillions. Okay? So let's bring it on home. The New Deal's impact on American society is it basically helps create what we call social welfare liberalism. It shifts the relationship between the United States and its government what that means is, does the government have a bigger or smaller role in your life before and after the New Deal? After the New Deal, bigger. The government will provide assistance to the unemployed, elderly, workers, and the poor, promoting the general welfare. New Deal liberalism. After the New Deal, the rights of workers increased. After the New Deal, we see some benefit toward African Americans as they shifted to the Democratic Party, though many of these things do not emerge until Harry Truman becomes president. Finally, we also see a shift in policy toward American Indians, as during the New Deal they decide to, in effect, end the Dawes Act. Okay? All right. So, in chapter 23 on your own, there's a huge event called the Dust Bowl, which I would like you to basically kind of learn on your own. There was that program that you did in Alphabet Soup, TVA. You should probably look at that. And the Grand Coulee Dam was another big thing that came out of the New Deal. You're having that terms quiz next time. And your entrance ticket is an evaluation of FDR. Terms quiz, evaluation. Terms quiz, evaluation. Terms quiz, evaluation. Yes? The bold test in chapter 23. Oh, could those of you shift the chairs back to the little pinwheely things that I have?
Yeah.